I watched my sister-in-law drink the poison she meant for me, and I did nothing to stop her. That sentence probably sounds like something a monster would say, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not a monster. My name is Mariam, and I wear my hijab every single day with the same quiet pride my mother taught me. I pray 5 times daily. I volunteer at the homeless shelter on Saturdays. I make baklava for my neighbors during Ramadan and invite everyone to break fast with us, Muslim or not. People see my headscarf and my modest clothes, and they make assumptions. They think I'm meek, submissive, that I do whatever I'm told without question. My sister-in-law Diane certainly thought so. She thought I was too religious, too traditional, too busy praying to notice what was happening right under my nose. She thought I was the perfect victim. What she didn't know was that being quiet doesn't mean being blind, and being patient doesn't mean being weak. This story started long before that Christmas Eve party in my home in Riverside, Connecticut. It started the day my husband Ibrahim died 2 years ago, leaving me with 2 children, a successful investment firm, and an estate worth more than I ever wanted to think about. It started with Diane's sweet smiles and helpful suggestions, with her brother, my brother-in-law Marcus, showing up unannounced to check on the business. But the story really crystallized that night when I saw her hand slip into her coat pocket and pull out a small amber bottle in my kitchen. This is a long story, and I'll need someone to walk through it with me. To be sure you hear how this all unfolded, you can follow along here. That way, you won't miss what happened next, because what happened next changed everything. Ibrahim died on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 2 years and 9 months before that Christmas party. He was 42, healthy, athletic. The kind of man who ran marathons for charity and did CrossFit at 5 a.m. before most people hit snooze on their alarms. We'd been married for 14 years, and I'd never even seen him take an aspirin for a headache. Then one morning, he kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, and dropped dead of a massive heart attack in the parking lot of his office building. The doctors said it was a genetic condition nobody knew he had. A time bomb that had been ticking his entire life. I was 34 years old, and suddenly a widow with 2 kids. Layla was 12, Omar was 9, and I had no idea how to run an investment firm. What I did have was a very substantial life insurance policy and full ownership of Khalil Investment Partners, the company Ibrahim had built from nothing over 15 years. The estate was valued at just under $8 million. The house alone was worth $1.3 million. We had investment properties, stocks, retirement accounts that now belonged to me and the kids. I'd never wanted any of it. I would have traded every single dollar to have Ibrahim back, to hear him laugh at my terrible jokes, to watch him teach Omar how to throw a football in the backyard. But that wasn't an option. So instead, I did what I've always done. I put my head down, I prayed for strength, and I handled it. The first person to show up at my door after the funeral wasn't Diane. It was Marcus, her husband, and Ibrahim's younger brother. He stood on my porch with a casserole his wife had made. "Diane doesn't cook," he explained, and tears in his eyes. He told me that if I needed anything at all, he was there for me. He said Ibrahim would have wanted him to take care of us. He said he knew I probably felt overwhelmed by the business side of things, and if I ever wanted help understanding the company, he'd be happy to sit down and go through everything with me. At the time, I thought it was grief. I thought he was genuinely trying to honor his brother's memory by supporting his widow and nephews. I was so stupid. Diane started coming around more often after that. She'd drop by on Wednesday afternoons when she knew I'd be alone, the kids still at school. She'd bring expensive coffee from that boutique place downtown and sit at my kitchen table for hours, asking questions. She wanted to know about the business, about the clients, about how much money was coming in. She asked if I'd thought about selling the company, told me it must be so stressful to manage it all on my own. She suggested, so gently, so sweetly, that maybe Marcus could help me. He had an MBA, she reminded me. He understood finance. He could take some of the burden off my shoulders. I told her I was managing fine, that Ibrahim's business partner, a man named Thomas Reeves, had been incredibly helpful in keeping everything running smoothly, that I was learning. Her smile got a little tighter after that. Then came the suggestions about the house. Wasn't it too big for just me and the kids? Wouldn't a nice condo be easier to maintain? She knew a fantastic realtor. She could help me downsize, make things simpler. I started to notice that her visits always ended the same way, with some comment about how hard this must be for me, how I probably didn't understand half of what Ibrahim had left behind, how it was okay to ask for help, how family takes care of family. The thing was, I did understand, more than she thought. I might wear a hijab and pray 5 times a day, but I'm not some delicate flower who can't read a bank statement. I have a degree in economics from Georgetown University. I worked in financial planning before Layla was born. I'd been involved in every major decision Ibrahim made about the company, even if I wasn't the public face of it. I knew exactly what I had. And I was starting to realize that Diane and Marcus knew it too. The real wake-up call came 6 months after Ibrahim's death. I was going through some old files in his office at home, looking for tax documents our accountant needed. That's when I found the folder. It was marked Marcus Personal in Ibrahim's handwriting. Inside were copies of loan documents. Marcus owed my husband over $200,000. The loans went back 5 years, a steady stream of emergencies and opportunities that Marcus had needed money for. Business ventures that failed, investments that went south, a gambling problem Ibrahim had tried to help him overcome. There was a note clipped to the most recent document, dated just 2 weeks before Ibrahim died. It said, "Spoke to Marcus today. He's asking for another $50K. I told him no. He didn't take it well. Said he was family and I owed him. I'm worried about him." I sat in that office for an hour, staring at those papers. Marcus owed Ibrahim a fortune. With Ibrahim dead, that debt died too. But only if I didn't know about it. Only if those papers stayed hidden in that file cabinet. And suddenly, all those helpful visits made perfect sense. I closed the folder and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I went downstairs, made myself tea, and started thinking very carefully about what came next. Because if Marcus owed Ibrahim that much money, and if Diane was pushing so hard for them to help me with the estate, then I needed to know exactly what they were planning. I needed to know before they made their move. The thing about being underestimated is that people get sloppy around you. They say things they shouldn't say. They leave papers out they shouldn't leave out. They assume you won't understand what you're looking at even if you do see it. Diane and Marcus got very, very sloppy. It started with the casual suggestion that I should make Marcus a co-signer on the business accounts. Just for convenience, Diane explained over coffee one afternoon. So if anything happened to me, God forbid, someone could keep things running for the kids. Someone who understood business. Someone Ibrahim would have trusted. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I told her I'd think about it. Then I called my lawyer. His name was David Chen, and he'd handled our estate planning when Ibrahim and I first bought the house. He was thorough, detail-oriented, and most importantly, he didn't talk down to me just because I wore a headscarf. I told him about Marcus's debts, about the visits, about the suggestions to sell the house and simplify my life. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me that in cases like this, where a widow comes into significant assets and has family members with financial problems circling around, I needed to be extremely careful. He'd seen situations where well-meaning relatives convinced grieving widows to sign things they didn't fully understand. Power of attorney documents, loan agreements, transfers of property. He asked if Marcus or Diane had ever brought papers for me to sign. Documents they said were routine or just formalities. I thought about it. Then I remembered. 3 months ago, Marcus had stopped by with a folder of papers. He'd said they were insurance documents that needed to be updated now that Ibrahim was gone. Just some beneficiary forms that needed my signature. Nothing major. I'd been in the middle of helping Omar with homework. Marcus had been so casual about it, so rushed. He'd said he'd already filled everything out. I just needed to sign at the bottom of page 3 and page 7. He'd even pointed to where my signature should go. I'd almost done it. My pen had been literally hovering over the line, but then Layla had come downstairs crying about a fight with a friend at school, and I'd set the papers aside to deal with my daughter. Marcus had looked annoyed, but said he'd come back another time to finish up. He never did come back for them. I'd completely forgotten about the folder until David asked. I told David I still had them, that they were in my desk drawer, unsigned. He asked me to bring them to his office immediately. Not to look at them. Not to sign anything. Just bring them directly to him. I did exactly that. 2 days later, David called me back into his office. His face was pale when I sat down across from his desk. The documents Marcus had brought weren't insurance forms. They were transfer papers that would have made him the legal executor of Ibrahim's estate. They would have given him full control of the investment accounts, the properties, everything. The language was deliberately confusing, buried in paragraphs of legal jargon that looked official, but was essentially signing away my rights as Ibrahim's widow. If I'd signed those papers, Marcus would have had complete access to the $8 million estate. I would have had to ask his permission to access my own money. David told me this was fraud, that I should go to the police immediately. But I didn't. Not yet, because I had a better idea. I asked David to help me do something a little different. I asked him to help me set up a surveillance system. Not the kind with obvious cameras that everyone knows are there. The kind with tiny, hidden cameras. The kind that record everything without anyone knowing they exist. I wanted to know exactly what Diane and Marcus were planning. I wanted to catch them in the act, on camera. So when I finally did go to the police, there would be no doubt. No room for them to claim it was all a misunderstanding, or that I'd misinterpreted their intentions. David hesitated. He said it might be better to just cut them off, change the locks, refuse to see them anymore. But I shook my head. Because here's the thing. I'd spent the past 10 months being the grateful, confused widow. The sweet, religious woman who needed help understanding her late husband's complicated affairs. I'd played that role perfectly. And now I was going to use it. I told David I wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves with. I wanted them to think they were winning. I wanted them to get comfortable, confident, reckless. I wanted them to reveal exactly how far they were willing to go. David looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded and made some calls. 3 days later, my house was wired. Cameras in the living room, the kitchen, my home office. Audio recording in every room where Diane and Marcus typically visited. All of it completely invisible. All of it streaming directly to a secure cloud server that only David and I could access. Then I did something that probably seems crazy. I invited them over for dinner. I told Diane I'd been thinking about what she said. That she was right. This was all so overwhelming. That maybe I did need Marcus's help with the business. That I wanted to discuss it over a family meal. She practically purred with satisfaction when I called. They arrived right on time that Friday evening, all smiles and hugs. Marcus brought wine. Diane brought flowers. They complimented the food. I'd made Ibrahim's favorite, lamb with saffron rice, and spent the first hour making small talk about the kids and the neighborhood. Then, after I served dessert and put on coffee, Marcus brought up the business. He told me he'd been doing some research into Khalil Investment Partners, that he'd noticed some concerning trends in the market, that he was worried about me trying to navigate it all alone. He said, with such concern in his voice, that he'd hate to see me make a mistake that could cost the kids their future. He suggested that the smart thing, the safe thing, would be to make him a legal partner in the firm. Not taking over, he insisted. Just providing guidance. Making sure everything was protected. All I had to do was sign some papers. He'd already had them drawn up. They were right there in his briefcase. I looked at Diane. She was nodding encouragingly, her hand covering mine on the table. She told me that this was what family did, that Ibrahim would want his brother to take care of us. I felt the weight of the camera recording every word. I felt the careful documentation of this exact moment when they tried to manipulate me into signing away everything my husband had built. I smiled sweetly. I told them I needed to think about it, to pray on it, to make sure it was the right decision. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. He said that was fine, that I should take all the time I needed. But Diane's eyes went cold for just a second, just long enough for me to see the calculation there, the impatience. That's when I knew. They weren't going to wait much longer. Whatever they were planning, it was coming soon. I've learned that the internet never forgets. 2 weeks after that dinner, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone at 2 a.m, unable to sleep. I'd been doing that a lot lately. Lying awake, thinking about Diane's cold eyes, about Marcus's tight jaw when I didn't immediately sign his papers. That's when I had an idea that seemed absurd at the time. I opened a private browsing window and typed, "How to check someone else's search history." The results were surprisingly detailed. Apparently, if you have access to someone's computer and they're not particularly tech-savvy, it's remarkably easy to see what they've been looking at online, especially if they don't know to clear their cache or use incognito mode. I thought about Diane's laptop. She brought it with her sometimes when she visited, setting it up on my kitchen table to work while we chatted. She was a real estate agent, she'd explained, always had to be available for clients. The next time she came over, I was ready. I made her favorite tea, some expensive organic blend she'd introduced me to. I made sure to serve it in the delicate china cups she loved, the ones that required careful handling. And when she inevitably asked to use the bathroom, leaving her laptop open on the table, I moved fast. It took me less than 3 minutes to insert a small USB drive David had given me. He'd been surprisingly willing to bend some rules once he understood what we were dealing with, and copy her entire browsing history and saved files. By the time she came back, I was sitting exactly where she'd left me, hands folded, asking if she wanted more tea. That night, after the kids were asleep, I went through everything. The first thing I found was her credit card statements. She'd saved them in a folder marked Taxes 2023, like that would keep them private. She and Marcus were drowning in debt, credit cards maxed out. A second mortgage on their house that was 3 months behind. Letters from collection agencies. A loan from someplace called Easy Money Advance charging 30% interest. They owed over $400,000. Combined with what Marcus already owed Ibrahim, they were $500,000 in the hole. But that wasn't the worst thing I found. The worst thing was the search history from 6 weeks ago. Life insurance payout for accidental death versus natural causes. How long until widow inherits if no will contest. Symptoms of heart attack in young women. Substances that mimic heart attack. Where to buy ricin. Undetectable poisons that cause cardiac arrest. How long does autopsy toxicology take? I sat there staring at my computer screen, my hands shaking so badly I had to set down my tea before I dropped it. Diane had been researching how to kill me, and she'd been stupid enough to do it on a computer she brought into my house. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to call the police right then. I wanted to grab my kids and run as far away as possible. Instead, I took screenshots of everything. I uploaded them to the same secure server as the video footage. I documented every single search, every saved article, every browsing history entry. Then I kept digging. I found emails between Diane and Marcus. They weren't even trying to hide it. They just didn't think I'd ever see them. One from 3 months ago, Marcus to Diane. She's not going to sign willingly. We need to think of another approach. Diane's response. Leave it to me. I have an idea. Another from 2 months ago, Diane to Marcus. I found someone who can get what we need. Cash only, no paper trail. Should be here by the end of the month. Marcus. Are you sure about this? It's a big step. Diane. We don't have a choice. We're out of time. The bank is threatening foreclosure. This is our only option. Besides, it'll look natural. She has a family history of heart disease through Ibrahim's genetics. No one will question it. Marcus. What about the kids? Diane. They're young. Marcus, you're their uncle. We'll take guardianship. We'll take care of them. I had to close the laptop. I walked to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet. They were going to kill me and take my children. They were going to poison me, make it look like a heart attack, claim guardianship of Layla and Omar, and then control the entire estate as the children's guardians until they turned 18. It was all mapped out, all planned, all waiting for the right moment. I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. My hijab was slightly askew. My eyes were red. I looked exactly like what I was. A terrified woman who'd just discovered her family wanted her dead. But I also saw something else in that reflection. I saw Ibrahim's wife. The woman who'd stood beside him for 14 years. The woman who'd learned to be strong even when she didn't feel strong. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to let them win. I was going to catch them, on camera, with witnesses, with evidence so overwhelming that they'd never see daylight again. But I had to be smart about it. One wrong move, and they'd know I was onto them. One sign that I suspected anything, and they might accelerate their timeline. Or worse, they might get desperate and messy. No, I needed them to think they were winning. I needed them to think I was still the sweet, naive widow who trusted family above all else. I needed them to commit to their plan so completely that there was no way out. The next morning, I called Diane. I told her I'd been thinking about what they'd discussed at dinner, that she was right. I couldn't do this alone. That I wanted to make Marcus a partner in the firm. I told her I was planning a Christmas party at my house, a big one. All the family, all our friends, everyone who'd been so supportive since Ibrahim died. I wanted to announce the partnership there, make it official, celebrate family. I could hear the smile in her voice when she told me that sounded perfect. She asked what she could bring. I told her not to worry about food, I had it covered. But maybe she could help with the drinks. She'd always had such good taste. She said she'd be delighted. Then she asked so casually if I'd been feeling okay lately, if my heart had been bothering me. She'd noticed I looked a little pale at that last dinner. I told her I'd been tired, stressed, but nothing serious. Nothing a nice party with family wouldn't fix. After I hung up, I called David. I told him everything. The searches, the emails, the plan. I told him I was going to host that Christmas party. I was going to let Diane bring the drinks. And I was going to catch her putting poison in my glass on camera, in my house, surrounded by witnesses. David was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if I was absolutely sure. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything in my life, but I needed his help. I needed him there at the party. I needed the police on standby. I needed everything ready to go the moment Diane made her move. He said he'd make it happen. Then I did one more thing. Something I'm still not sure was smart or crazy. I started wearing a small camera on my hijab pin. One of those tiny things people use for body cams. David got it for me. It looked like an ordinary decorative pin, something traditional and modest. But it recorded everything. Every conversation. Every interaction. I was going to make sure that when this was over, there was no doubt about what happened. No doubt about who the real victim was. The 3 weeks before the Christmas party were the longest of my life. I had to act normal. I had to smile and hug Diane when she stopped by. I had to listen to Marcus explain his vision for the company. I had to pretend I didn't know they were planning to murder me. Every night, after the kids went to bed, I reviewed the footage from my hidden cameras. I documented everything. Every visit, every comment, every subtle manipulation. Diane came over more often now. She was so attentive, so concerned about my health. She kept bringing up Ibrahim's heart attack, asking if I'd been to the doctor for a checkup. suggesting that I should get my heart tested, reminding me that these things run in families, that I should be careful. She was laying the groundwork for my death, but she was also getting impatient. I could see it in the tightness around her mouth, the way her eyes would flicker with annoyance when I'd change the subject. She wanted this done. They were running out of time. The foreclosure notice on their house was dated for January 15th. They needed me dead before then. I coordinated everything with David. He brought in a detective he trusted, a woman named Sarah Morrison, who specialized in fraud and domestic cases. She reviewed all my evidence and confirmed what I already knew. What Diane and Marcus were planning was conspiracy to commit murder. But Sarah told me something I hadn't considered. The poison itself was evidence we needed. We had the searches, the emails, but we didn't have proof that Diane actually possessed anything dangerous. That changed 1 week before the party. Diane stopped by with Christmas cookies. She was in a good mood, chatty and relaxed. She stayed for almost 2 hours, drinking tea and talking about the party. She asked about the menu, the guest list, the decorations. She reminded me she'd handle the drinks. After she left, I noticed her purse was still on my kitchen counter. I stared at it for a full minute. I knew I should just put it aside and call her to come get it. That going through someone's purse was a violation of privacy. But then I thought about her search history, about her emails, about the fact that she was planning to murder me in my own home. I opened her purse. The small amber bottle was tucked into an inside pocket, wrapped in tissue paper like it was precious. It was unlabeled, clear liquid inside, maybe 2 ounces total. My hands were shaking as I took photos of it from every angle, careful not to touch it directly. Then I did something David had prepared me for. I used a plastic pipette to extract a small sample and transferred it to a sterile vial he'd given me. The vial went into a sealed evidence bag, which went into a locked box in my home safe. Then I wrapped the bottle back up and put it exactly where I'd found it. 20 minutes later, Diane called in a panic. She'd left her purse. Could she come get it? I told her, of course. It was right where she'd left it. She was breathless with relief when she picked it up. She even opened it right there in front of me to check that everything was still inside. Her fingers brushed over that inside pocket where the bottle was hidden. She smiled at me and said she'd see me at the party. David rushed the sample to a private lab. They called back in 48 hours. The liquid was aconite, also known as wolfsbane, a plant-based poison that causes cardiac arrest and mimics a heart attack almost perfectly. Unless someone specifically tests for it, it wouldn't show up in a standard autopsy toxicology screen. It was perfect. It was untraceable. It was exactly what Diane's internet searches had been looking for. And now we had proof she possessed it. Sarah Morrison came to my house 3 days before the party. She walked me through exactly what was going to happen. The party would proceed normally. Diane would bring the drinks. We had cameras covering every angle of my kitchen and living room. Sarah and 2 other plainclothes officers would be attending as friends of mine, people I'd met through the mosque. I'd tell Diane if she asked. The moment Diane put anything in my drink, they'd have her on camera. But they wouldn't move in immediately. They'd wait for her to make the offer, for me to take the glass. They needed her intent to be absolutely clear. Sarah looked me in the eye and asked if I understood what I was agreeing to. She told me there was a risk, that things could go wrong, that even with officers right there, even with everything planned, I'd be holding a glass of poison in my hand. I told her I understood. Then, I asked her to make me a promise. If something did go wrong, if somehow things went sideways and I did drink that poison, I needed her to make sure Diane and Marcus never got their hands on my kids, that Layla and Omar went to my parents in Virginia, not to their uncle. Sarah promised me she'd make sure of it. But I wasn't planning on letting things go wrong. I'd spent 2 years being the grieving widow, 2 years being underestimated, 2 years watching people assume that because I was religious and modest, I was also naive and weak. Diane and Marcus were about to learn exactly how wrong they'd been. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about Ibrahim, about how he'd always told me I was stronger than I knew, about how he'd trusted me to take care of our children, our business, our life. I thought about what he'd say if he could see me now, preparing to face down his own brother. I think he'd tell me to be careful, to be smart, to protect the kids above everything else. But I also think he'd be proud of me. Because I wasn't running, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't letting them destroy everything he'd built. I was fighting back, in my own way, with my own weapons. And tomorrow night, at my Christmas party, surrounded by friends and family and witnesses, I was going to watch Diane try to poison me. And then I was going to make sure she faced exactly what she deserved. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and a house full of light. I'd spent the entire day preparing. The house was decorated with garlands and candles. I'd cooked for hours, stuffed grape leaves, lamb kebabs, saffron rice, date cookies, traditional foods from Ibrahim's family that everyone expected at my gatherings. Layla helped me set the table. Omar hung lights in the living room. They were excited about the party, oblivious to what was really about to happen. I'd sent them to my parents' house for the night, told them it was an adult party, and they could celebrate Christmas morning with their grandparents. I needed them safe. I needed them far away from what was coming. By 6 o'clock, guests started arriving. Friends from the mosque, neighbors, people from Ibrahim's company. The house filled with warmth and laughter and the smell of good food. Sarah Morrison arrived at 6:30, dressed casually, blending in perfectly with a plate of store-bought cookies. She caught my eye briefly, gave me the smallest nod. The two other officers arrived separately over the next 20 minutes. One was an older man who could pass for someone's grandfather. The other was a young woman who looked like she could be from my community. David Chen came at 7, playing the role of the family lawyer joining for the holiday celebration. He positioned himself near the kitchen with a clear view of the drinks table. Diane and Marcus arrived at 7:15. She looked beautiful. That's what made it so terrible. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than they could afford, and diamond earrings that caught the light. Her makeup was perfect. Her smile was warm as she hugged me, told me how lovely everything looked, how wonderful it was to see everyone together. Marcus kissed my cheek and told me how proud Ibrahim would be to see his family gathering like this. I felt sick. Diane was carrying a designer bag over her shoulder, the same purse I'd found the poison in. She told me she'd brought some special drinks for the occasion. Holiday cocktails, she said. She'd mixed them at home in these beautiful glass carafes. She had cranberry mimosas and spiked apple cider. She asked where she should set up the drink station. I showed her to the mahogany sideboard in the living room, where I'd already arranged the crystal glasses. The glasses that had been Ibrahim's mother's. The ones I only brought out for special occasions. She started arranging everything. I watched her from across the room, making conversation with Mrs. Farid from the mosque, but my eyes never left Diane. That's when I saw Marcus intercept two of the guests who'd been heading toward the drinks. He redirected them toward the kitchen, told them there was hot cider on the stove that was better. He was steering people away from Diane's station. They were isolating the drinks table. I excused myself from Mrs. Farid and moved closer. Sarah Morrison had positioned herself in the hallway with a clear view. The camera on my hijab pin was recording everything. I pretended to adjust some decorations near the window. From there, I could see Diane perfectly. She pulled out one specific glass from the set. The one with the etched initials, IMK, Ibrahim Mahmoud Khalil. It had been his favorite. Everyone who knew us knew I always used that glass at parties. It was sentimental, a way to feel like he was still part of our celebrations. Diane knew exactly which glass was mine. She looked around. Casual. Just checking to see who was watching. I bent down like I was fixing something on the floor, keeping my head turned just enough that my pin camera had a perfect angle. Diane reached into her purse. Her hand came out with something palmed, something small that fit in her closed fist. I couldn't see what it was from where I stood, but I knew. She positioned herself between her body and the wall, blocking the view from most of the room. But not from me. Not from Sarah Morrison in the hallway. Not from the hidden cameras David had installed. She uncapped the small bottle with her thumb. I saw the amber glass catch the light for just a second. Then she tipped it over the glass with Ibrahim's initials. 3 drops. 4. 5. She capped the bottle, slipped it back in her purse, and smoothly picked up one of the carafes to pour cranberry mimosa into the glass. The poison disappeared into the pink liquid. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought everyone in the room must hear it. She arranged the poisoned glass slightly apart from the others. Then she turned around, all smiles, and called out to the room. She announced that drinks were ready. Special holiday cocktails. Everyone should come get one. I watched people start to move toward the sideboard. Diane caught my eye across the room. Her smile got wider. She picked up the glass with Ibrahim's initials. She walked toward me, carrying my death in her hands. The room felt like it was moving in slow motion. I could see Sarah Morrison's hand move toward her badge. I could see David Chen stand up straighter. Diane reached me. She put her hand on my arm, so gentle, so caring. She told me I looked tired. That I'd worked so hard for this beautiful party. That I should take a moment, have a drink, relax. She held out the glass to me. I looked down at it. Pink and sparkling and beautiful. Deadly. I looked up at Diane's face, at the concern in her eyes that didn't quite reach all the way, at the subtle tension in her jaw. I took the glass from her hand. I told her thank you, that she was so thoughtful. I lifted it toward my lips. Sarah Morrison took a step forward. I saw her hand on her weapon. But I didn't drink. Instead, I looked at Diane and said, I needed to get something from the kitchen first. Some of those date cookies to go with the drink. Would she hold this for me? I tried to press the glass back into her hand. Diane's face flickered. Just for a second. Confusion. Frustration. Then she recovered. She told me no, I should go ahead and drink it. She'd get the cookies for me. I should relax. But I insisted. I told her my hands were full anyway. I needed to check on the lamb in the oven. I set the glass down on a console table near where we stood. Then I walked toward the kitchen. I heard Diane behind me, calling out that she'd bring me the drink, that I should stay put. But I kept walking. The kitchen was crowded with people. I moved through them, adjusting dishes, checking on food, playing the hostess, making sure there were witnesses to where I was and what I was doing. When I came back to the living room 5 minutes later, Diane was standing exactly where I'd left her. She'd picked up the glass. She was holding it like she didn't know what to do with it. Marcus was next to her, whispering something. His face was tight with tension. I walked up to them. I thanked Diane for holding my drink. I reached for the glass. But as my hand touched it, there was a commotion at the door. More guests arriving. Mrs. Fareed's daughter with her 3 children, loud and excited about the snow. Everyone turned. The attention shifted. And in that moment of chaos and distraction and movement, as bodies pressed together and people called out greetings, I made the switch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. It was just 2 crystal glasses on a console table, and my hand moving faster than it had ever moved before. When I turned back around, I had a glass of cranberry mimosa in my hand, but it wasn't the one with Ibrahim's initials. That glass was now sitting exactly where Diane's own untainted drink had been. I took a sip of my safe drink, the one Diane had poured for herself. Then I suggested a toast, to family, to Ibrahim's memory, to being together. Everyone raised their glasses. Diane reached for the console table without looking. She picked up the nearest glass, the one with the etched initials, the one she'd poisoned 5 minutes earlier. She held it up in the toast, smiling at me. And then she drank. The first sign something was wrong came about 3 minutes after Diane swallowed. She was mid-conversation with someone, talking about real estate market trends, when she stopped. Her hand went to her throat, just for a second. A small, confused gesture. Then she continued talking, but her voice was slightly off, breathier. I was watching her from across the room. Sarah Morrison was watching her too. We'd both seen enough medical emergencies to know what was coming. Aconite works fast. The research I'd done said symptoms could start within minutes of ingestion. Heart palpitations first, then difficulty breathing, then cardiac arrest. Diane excused herself from the conversation. She said she needed some air. Her face was flushed. Marcus went to her immediately. He asked if she was okay. She told him she felt strange. Her heart was racing. I walked over, all concern. I asked if she needed to sit down, if she wanted water. She looked at me with confusion, like she couldn't understand why she was feeling this way. Then her legs buckled. Marcus caught her. He was calling her name. People were gathering around. Diane's face had gone from flushed to gray in less than 30 seconds. She was gasping. Her hand clutched at her chest. Someone yelled to call 911. I dropped to my knees beside her. I looked like the panicked friend, the concerned hostess. But as I leaned down, as Marcus cradled her head, I whispered in her ear, low enough that only she could hear. I told her I'd seen her, that I'd watched her put the poison in my drink, that I'd switched the glasses, that she'd drunk her own poison. Her eyes went wide, focused on me with absolute terror and understanding. I told her the police were already here, that everything had been recorded, that she'd failed. Then I sat back and called loudly for someone to help her. Sarah Morrison was already moving. She identified herself as a police officer. She told everyone to step back. She started CPR even though we both knew it was probably too late. The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes, but Diane had stopped breathing after 4. They worked on her in my living room for 22 minutes. They got her heart restarted twice. But the aconite had done its work too thoroughly. She was pronounced dead at 8:47 p.m. Marcus was screaming. He was demanding to know what happened, how this was possible. She was healthy. She was young. This didn't make sense. That's when Sarah Morrison stood up. She identified herself officially. She told Marcus he needed to come with her, that she had questions about his wife's death. He looked confused, angry. He demanded to know what was going on. David Chen stepped forward. He told Marcus that Diane had been caught on camera poisoning a drink intended for me, that she'd accidentally consumed the poison herself when the glasses were switched, that there was evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's face went white. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. I stood there in my hijab and my modest dress, surrounded by my friends and family, covered in his wife's blood from trying to help her. And I looked back at him with absolutely no expression on my face. Sarah Morrison read him his rights right there in my living room. She told him he was being arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The other 2 officers moved in. They found Diane's purse. The amber bottle was still inside. Marcus started talking then, fast, desperate. He said it wasn't his idea, that Diane had planned everything, that he'd tried to talk her out of it, that he never thought she'd actually go through with it. Sarah told him to save it for his lawyer. As they led him out in handcuffs, past all the guests who'd come for a Christmas party and ended up witnessing an attempted murder, Marcus looked back at me one more time. He asked me why I hadn't just told them no, why I hadn't just cut them off, why I'd let it get this far. I didn't answer him. I didn't owe him an explanation. But I knew why. Because I'd needed proof. Because if I'd just refused to help them, they would have found another way, another time, another method. They were desperate enough and greedy enough that they wouldn't have stopped, because I'd needed them to commit fully to the plan, to cross a line they couldn't come back from. Because I'd needed to protect my children from people who were willing to murder their mother and then take guardianship of them. Because I'd needed everyone to see, my family, my friends, the courts, the world, exactly what kind of people they were. The guests were asked to stay for statements. Sarah Morrison coordinated everything. David Chen handled the legal aspects. The medical examiner's office came for Diane's body. By midnight, my house was empty, except for the police finishing their documentation. I sat on my couch, still in my blood-stained dress, and called my parents. I told them what happened. I told them the kids were safe. I told them I'd explain everything in the morning. Then I sat there in my silent, decorated house, with the Christmas lights still twinkling and the food still laid out on the table, and I let myself feel it. The fear I'd been holding in for months. The rage at being underestimated and manipulated and targeted. The grief over losing even more of Ibrahim's family, but also something else. Relief. Because it was over. Because I'd survived. Because my children would never have to spend a single day in Marcus and Diane's care. And beneath that, something harder to name. A kind of fierce satisfaction in knowing that I'd done this my way. That I hadn't let them make me a victim. That I'd used the very qualities they'd dismissed. My patience, my modesty, my quiet observation, to protect myself and my children. Sarah Morrison sat down next to me before she left. She asked if I was okay. I told her I would be. She said what I'd done was brave and risky, and that she hoped I never had to do anything like it again. I told her I hoped so too. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said that people underestimate quiet strength all the time, that they confuse gentleness with weakness, that I'd proven tonight that those people are always wrong. After she left, I sat there for another hour. Then I got up, cleaned the blood off my floor, and packed away the Christmas decorations. Because the holiday was over, and tomorrow, a different kind of day would begin. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Marcus pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, attempted fraud, and a list of financial crimes that came to light during the investigation. The prosecutor laid out everything: the debts, the forged documents, the emails, the search history. They played the security footage of Diane poisoning the glass. They showed the lab results proving the liquid was aconite. They presented my testimony about the months of manipulation and the documents Marcus had tried to get me to sign. His lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of his wife's schemes, but the emails told a different story. He'd known. He'd planned. He'd been willing to let his brother's widow die so he could steal from his brother's children. The judge gave him 25 years. I didn't go to the sentencing. David Chen went on my behalf and reported back. He said Marcus had tried to make a statement about how sorry he was, how he'd never meant for things to go this far. The judge cut him off. She told him that attempting to murder a woman and orphan her children wasn't something that just went too far. It was evil, and she hoped he spent every day of those 25 years thinking about how he'd betrayed his own family. I was glad I hadn't been there. I didn't need to hear Marcus's apologies or excuses. I didn't need closure from him. I needed to focus on rebuilding. The estate was settled. Every dollar Marcus had tried to claim was secured for Layla and Omar. The business was thriving. It turned out I was actually pretty good at running an investment firm, once I didn't have to worry about someone sabotaging me from the inside. I hired a new partner, a woman named Jennifer who'd worked with Ibrahim years ago. She was brilliant and honest and treated me like an equal. Together we expanded the firm. We brought in new clients. We grew. The house felt different now. It had been violated by what almost happened there. But it was also the place where I'd taken control of my life, where I'd proven to myself that I was strong enough to protect my family. We stayed. But I redecorated. New furniture, new memories. Layla and Omar needed time to understand what had happened. They were angry that their uncle had tried to hurt their mother. They were confused about why family would do something like that. They needed therapy. So did I. But slowly, we healed. Layla is 16 now. She's fierce and smart, and she knows exactly who she is. She wants to be a lawyer. She says someone needs to protect people like I had to protect us. Omar is 13. He's gentler than his sister, more like his father. He wants to be an engineer. He builds things in the garage and explains to me how bridges work and why certain structures are stable. They're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. The money that Diane and Marcus had wanted so desperately, the $8 million they'd been willing to kill for, is doing something they never imagined. I set up a foundation in Ibrahim's name. It helps widows who've been left vulnerable, who've been targeted by family members or manipulated out of their inheritance, who need legal help or financial advice or just someone who understands. I think Ibrahim would have liked that. That his legacy is protecting people the way I had to protect myself. As for me, I still wear my hijab every day. I still pray 5 times daily. I still make baklava for my neighbors and invite everyone to break fast during Ramadan. But now, when people see me, they see something different too. They see a woman who survived, who fought back, who protected her children against people who should have protected them. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. That woman was innocent in some ways, trusting in ways that I can't be anymore. But I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm just aware. Aware of how people can surprise you. Aware of how desperation can turn family into enemies. Aware of my own strength. Sometimes I think about that moment at the Christmas party when I held the poisoned glass in my hand, when I had to make the choice to switch it or not, when I had to decide if I was willing to let Diane face the consequences of her own actions. People have asked me if I feel guilty, if I have nightmares about watching her die. The honest answer is no. I feel sad that she made the choices she made. I feel sorry for the person she could have been if greed hadn't consumed her. But I don't feel guilty for surviving. She meant to kill me. She planned it, purchased the poison, and poured it into my glass with her own hands. The fact that she ended up drinking it instead was her own mistake, her own karma, her own fate. I didn't kill Diane. She killed herself the moment she decided my life was worth less than her debts. Today is Wednesday. It's been 2 years since that Christmas party. I'm sitting in my home office, reviewing proposals for the foundation. Layla is doing homework at the kitchen table. Omar is building something with Legos in the living room. The December snow is falling outside, coating the pines in that same heavy white blanket. But this time, I'm not planning a party. I'm not watching for poison. I'm not pretending to be weak so I can be strong when it matters. I'm just living, raising my kids, running my business, helping other women who find themselves where I was. I've learned that strength doesn't always look like people expect it to. Sometimes it looks like patience, like observation, like choosing your moment. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a hijab switching glasses while no one's watching. And sometimes it looks like waking up every morning and choosing to keep going, keep fighting, keep protecting the people you love. That's the kind of strength I have. That's the kind of strength I want to teach my daughter and my son. Not the strength to hurt people, but the strength to make sure they can never hurt you. If you've been following this story, thank you for walking through it with me. I know it wasn't easy to hear. It wasn't easy to live through either. But I want you to know that if you're in a situation like I was, if someone is trying to manipulate you, control you, take what's yours, you have more power than you think. You have more strength than they give you credit for. Don't let anyone underestimate you. Don't let anyone make you doubt your own instincts. And if you've made it to the end of this story, I hope you'll take a moment to share where you're listening from. I'd love to know where this story has reached. Drop your city in the comments below, and if you want to follow more stories like this, stories about survival, strength, and justice, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because there are more stories to tell. More women who fought back. More endings that aren't what the villains expected. My name is Miriam. I'm a widow, a mother, a business owner, and a woman of faith. And I'm still here. That's all that matters.